There's a huge difference between self-help and shelf-help. And I want to explain this to you. About 15 years ago, I was reading all the books. I had all the knowledge on exactly what a great mindset was. I knew everything. I had quotes coming out of my ears. I had quotes on repeat coming out of my mouth to friends. I knew everything there was to know about mindset. I knew who all the big writers in mindset were. I knew who all the big presenters were. And I did know about my mindset. I felt as though I had it all. But the truth is, I was still living a life I wasn't happy with. I had minimal success. I was unfulfilled, and nothing seemed to ever go quite the way I wanted it to go. Now, don't get me wrong. When I say minimal success, I had a house, a mortgage, everything was okay. I was earning decent money, but I never seemed to be able to fully get ahead or fully make it work. And I realized that I'd been doing shelf-help. I would read the book, I'd take in the knowledge and the concepts, and I'd put the book back on the shelf, and I'd never really apply the knowledge. I had a plethora of intellectual adjectives and, little tiny, ways of living life that I would talk about. I just never actually did anything about it. And this has all come to mind recently because I met up with a man who did our training about 4 years ago. And it was super exciting. He came to give us a quote from the business that he now runs. And we always love to utilize people in our community. If they've got a business that can service our business, we always want to do that. And so he came to give us a quote. However, he arrived and he just looked different. He looked completely different. And I thought, what's changed? He looks confident. He seems really self-assured. There was no stress. And this was a guy who, when we'd first met him, he was like super highly strung, really angry, that typical kind of tradie that was like, nah, 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 all the time. Like everything just had to happen quickly and it was erratic. And all of a sudden he's turned up and he's just calm. And he just felt so good. Now, he did our training 4 years ago and he enjoyed the training. He did nothing with it though. It was kind of just an idea, just something like my shelf help. 2 years ago, he came back and he did the training again. And he did that because his partner who'd done the training said to him, I don't think you got it the first time. You should go and do it again. And she was hoping for this great outcome. And again, he came and he had a great time and he kind of got it. He still did nothing. So after those 2 years, she was expecting this grand result for her husband and in fact didn't get much of a result at all. But every time she questioned him, he knew the answer. He knew the right thing to say. He knew how to fix the problem conceptually. He just never actually implemented any of it. And this is a problem in society. Lots of people, especially now with the invention of AI, are getting conceptual knowledge. So they know the answer, they can talk the answer, but they're not walking the walk. And there's a big difference between someone who can talk the talk and someone who walks the walk. And I wonder which version of that you want to be. Because every time I'm going to choose to be the person that walks what I talk. I actually put into action the things that I learn. So when we're just making sense of concepts and there's no implementation, we're never going to get the results that we seek. And we see this so often in the world that I'm in. I see people who go, I've spent so much money on coaches, I just don't know how working with you is going to make any difference. And my answer is have you taken action? Yes, I've done the thing. And maybe they did a little bit. However, they didn't fully embody and integrate the concept in order to take aligned action. So I'm sitting there watching this guy quote us for carpet actually in our training room. and his business is going so well. He feels so good. And I said to him, hey, what's your business doing these days? And he goes, do you know what? We're multi-seven figures, Liz. And I went, wow. So 4 years after the first time you came, 2 years after the second time, you've got a multi-seven figure business. He goes, yeah, and I totally believe it's all because of the work that we did with NLP. And him and his wife had both done the training. See, the thing is when he first did it, he might have thought it didn't work. The truth was he didn't work it. And this is a problem that lots of people have. When they go and learn something, yet they get it conceptually and they don't actually embed it in their nervous system and live their life through it, they can come up with this idea or a belief is that if something doesn't work, then it's actually the thing's problem. There's nothing wrong with them. It's actually the thing that didn't work. So when people believe that it doesn't work immediately, they say that training didn't work, that course didn't work, that book didn't work. They'll say things like, if it didn't work, if they didn't use it straight away, they'll say, oh, it's a waste of my money. If they don't see results straight away, they'll say, oh, I did it wrong or something didn't land. And see, the truth is that they never actually took action. And there's a few different ways of looking at this. First, you can look at it through the lens of seeds versus symptoms. So if someone is actually doing a training, learning an action, reading a book, then what they're going to do is they're going to gain knowledge first of all. The trick is they then have to take that knowledge and apply it to the symptoms that they're currently experiencing. So let's say, for example, you have a confidence problem, you go and do a confidence course, you learn the 5 steps to confidence and you really get it. And when you're in the training, you're like, yep, step number 1 is this, step number 2, I know how to do that, step number 3, I'm great. Yet they then walk into a situation where they're having a meeting with their boss, for example, and all the same old stuff comes up because they never applied those seeds or those learnings to the symptoms in their life. They merely applied it to the time in life that they were at that training or doing that learning. Does that make sense? So they're sitting in the training room, everything's exciting, everyone's great, and they're enjoying it by being in the present moment rather than looking at the knowledge that they're learning and applying it to all the challenges they've already had in their life that they wanted to fix. So they're not future pacing themselves into how do I take this knowledge and move myself forward. So that's challenge number 1, is that the seeds have to be matched to the symptoms. In other words, you learn the first step to confidence, and the first step to confidence might be stand up straight and take a big breath in. Well, when they went to meet with their manager in the office, did they remember to stand up straight and take a breath in? And the way that they could have remembered that is that when they were in the training, creating a picture in their mind of when they saw the manager's office door, that they actually made a trigger where that trigger triggered them to stand up straight and take a big breath in. Does that make sense? So the seed or the learning has to be applied and actually attached to or triggered by the symptom so that the next time that problem or challenge comes along, the learning is embodied and implemented. In other words, you have to take action. The next thing is identity readiness. Sometimes when you learn something new, your identity just isn't ready to apply it. And in the case of this particular person that I met up with the other day, when he first learned this, he wasn't ready to change his life. He thought he was, but he didn't want to give up going out and partying. He didn't want to give up, the way his lifestyle was being run. He didn't want to give up any of the old version of him. He just wanted to keep that and become the new version. And that's where we get a lack of identity readiness. In other words, our old identity is so strong that we're unwilling to let it die in order to become the new version of ourselves. And this happens commonly when people learn personal development ideas or concepts or mindset ideas and concepts, is they take it in as head knowledge and they never realize that in order to change, you actually have to change. So for example, if you want to run a business, you need to have the identity of a business owner, not the identity of a worker. And sometimes if we're still, in our old job, we have to hold both identities at the same time. And for some people that gets really heavy and they're unsure how to do it. So we have to make sure that while we're learning and while we're implementing, we're also realizing that a change in our identity is necessary for us to function through the newly learned behaviors. Because if we're not ready to give up our old behaviors, there's possibly no space for new behaviors. And that's why often in personal development, there's a high ticket investment required, because it's believed that if people are willing to put that much money into it, then they're willing to make the changes required. Unfortunately, that's not always the case. The next challenge is delayed activation. In other words, you learn something new, and for some reason at the end of the training or at the end of the learning, you get sick or you have a baby or you move house or you move country or you have to spend a whole lot of money on fixing something up around the house. And instead of activating that learning straight away, you actually take a pause. Well, over time, the learning that's just in your head starts to dissolve. It's actually the learning that you've activated and pursued and taken action on that becomes embedded in your nervous system. So the issue when you're doing a training or reading a book or learning something is never your ability to learn. It's actually the problem of not activating the actions required to cement that learning into your behavior. Because thoughts are one thing and actions are something completely different. Actions are what you do with the new knowledge you have. And if that new knowledge is coming in and you're not doing anything with it, then it just joins the soup of thoughts that you have floating around in your mind. When you take that learning and apply an action to it, it starts a new program. It starts a new program in your brain that says, wow, we learnt this thing and now we do it. And that sets you up for success. So if you've been and done a training or read a book and you haven't got the result that you wanted, the real issue is that you've never taken action and you haven't activated. You've never activated that learning. You've just let it sit there in the soup of your mind, spinning around with whatever other thoughts you're having. And you might know it enough to make a comment here and there about it. You might know it enough to say, yeah, I learned that, didn't really work for me. The question is not, does it work? It's when will I work it? In other words, when will I put the effort in to activate? When will I put the effort in to do the thing I say I'm going to do? When will I trust myself enough to take the actions to do the thing I learned? When will I let go of the old identity and take action? When will I actually apply those new learnings, the seeds, to the symptoms that I'm experiencing? It's not, does this work? It's when will I work it?